Well, I have to get started with a little Texans news here. It's not all good news, but nonetheless, we have to talk about some of it. First of all, San Bernardino County, they have announced that they have shut down an illegal cockfighting ring. It resulted in about a dozen people being arrested. They were sent to a location where there was reported that there was a cockfight, and they arrived on scene. Approximately 50 cars were there, and many of them trying to drive away once they saw the cops. This, of course, created somewhat of a dangerous situation for the officers. When the deputies attempted to stop a vehicle, the driver accelerated toward a patrol unit. Statement said the deputy avoided being struck when he attempted to initiate a traffic stop, but then a pursuit ensued. The driver and the three passengers of the vehicle were taken into custody. Jose Adame, the driver, was arrested and had his car impounded. The rear area of the vehicle had 6 roosters in it. The overall operation resulted in the detainment of some 33 people who were spectators on the property, and they found a total of 250 roosters. Investigators found a fighting ring with a scoreboard and steel talons, which they actually mount onto the roosters to allow them to be a little more lethal when they're fighting. A man identified as Carlos Romero was seen by police via aerial assets hiding inside a truck at the rear of the property. He had 7 live roosters in boxes and a large sum of cash, and he was also carrying a Ruger semi-auto. No big deal. This is Texas. I expect most of you have 1 or 2 or 3 weapons in your vehicle, so that shouldn't even have been a note in this story. Both Adame and Romero are now booked into jail. Additional search of the property authorized by a warrant yielded discovery of more steel talons and an additional 24 firearms taken from a large safe. Once again, this is Texas. That's no big deal. If he had a large safe and there are only 24 firearms in there, I'm wondering why he even bought the safe. San Bernardino County Animal Control recovered approximately 17 dead roosters, 8 live roosters, and tagged 61 boxed roosters. I didn't know roosters came in boxes, but now I do. This is not the first major cockfighting ring that's been busted in recent months. Potter County Sheriff's Office in Amarillo, Texas Game Wardens, and Texas Department of Public Safety recovered 170 roosters early last year and detained 6 illegal aliens who were turned over to the federal immigration authorities so they could be released. Ivan Guadalupe Herrera Lopez and Salvador Sanchez Chavez were each arrested on cockfighting charges, while Juana Sanchez Gonzalez was arrested for possession of a controlled substance. Every spectator is, of course, facing misdemeanor charges now because it's illegal to watch a cockfight or be a witness to it, let alone to be in charge of fighting roosters. So Texas Game Warden Ryan Hunter added that if you're aware of a large gathering, especially where you see a lot of chicken coops or different equipment, chances are there's cockfighting going on. That's something that you should report to the authorities. So wanted to get that out. But there's also this. This is a sad story, but I feel like you need to be made aware of it because here in Texas, we're having this problem. FBI Special Agent Jeanette Harper, in a January 20th interview with WOI TV, said the issue is impacting El Paso, Texas, and Houston and Dallas. She said what we see is we have these drug-addicted parents that are now trafficking their children for intimate acts so that these parents can afford to buy drugs. It's really hard that the parents are more concerned about buying drugs than what they're doing to their children. I mean, if you're a child, the person you should be able to trust most is your mom or your dad, and yet they're now handing you over to people for use. Trying to be a little euphemistic here. Look, I'm very fortunate. I was raised by a mother and a father, and neither my mother or my father were drinkers, and neither my mother or my father were engaged in any of the nefarious activities that, well, these people were engaged in. Many of these drug-addicted parents will bring people into their homes to spend time with their children, or they'll rent a cheap hotel. The main goal is to get money for drugs, and they're not going to go to a hotel or an expensive hotel, or they're not going to rent out an Airbnb because they don't have any money anyway. Nicole Schiff, the executive director of a nonprofit called Center for Hope, which operates alongside the FBI, said that El Paso and Houston and Dallas are the big hot hubs, so to speak. She detailed some of the heartbreaking situations where her organization has encountered. So we had this one case where the father was the trafficker, and then we had another case where the mom sold her daughter because she needed the money for drugs. She said citizens reporting suspicious activity to the authorities is the best way to combat this sort of thing going on. There are lots of legal reporting requirements for people that are either teachers, doctors, or just caregivers in general. But unfortunately, as you know, you hear reports all the time of school teachers that are being involved in this sort of situation. But anyway, the El Paso field office issued a notice last year to raise awareness about the various forms of trafficking that goes on when individuals are compelled by force, fraud, or coercion to engage in these sort of physical acts. The trafficking of a child can be proven without demonstrating force, fraud, or coercion were at play. The FBI has warned that this occurs in every community, all the way up into the richest parts of town, and of course, in the poor parts of town. We need to pray against this, number one. And number two, we need to do our part. If we see something like this, we need to look into it and see if we can do something to solve the problem. I should remind you, though, that a lot of people involved in this are extremely dangerous people, and life is not very valuable to them, so you should be very careful. Now, this. You've probably noticed, if you're watching this on Rumble, of course, or TikTok, or YouTube even, that I'm wearing my Pilots for Trump t-shirt. And that is, of course, because I am an amateur pilot, and I do support Donald Trump as the greatest president in the history of the United States. I will make this comment on what we saw happen with the aircraft crash over the weekend. The pilot of the Black Hawk helicopter had less than 500 hours of experience. That is not much for a pilot. They were also short one crew member, and that crew member's job on a night flight using night vision goggles was to be on the lookout for other possible aircraft or hazards in the area. So they were short one member to begin with, and we had a pilot that had very few hours, and she was on a check flight. We also found out that the tower was undermanned, and so we had one particular air traffic controller out of the 19 that were working that night, who was handling both military and civilian aircraft. This is not a good idea. It rarely ever happens. The last thing I would like to mention to that, I can tell you that when I was learning to fly, I had to be able to maintain the aircraft within 50 feet of my assigned altitude, or I could not get my certification. This helo pilot was 100 feet above her assigned altitude. Once again, I believe that that was because of her inexperience, and who knows what else may have been going on at that point in time. But I can tell you this, Donald Trump, once again, nailed it. DEI is a factor. Meanwhile, I want to go to Benjamin Fulford. He's sort of an interesting fellow, and sometimes he finds stuff that no one else does. But he said this: the revolution that swept Donald Trump into power is unfolding at a blistering rate, and certainly it is. That's why I wake up every morning with a smile on my face. But a lot of it is all over the news, and readers probably haven't already seen it. So we want to mention this. The biggest move that is still not in the news is that Donald Trump has given Russia the green light to take over NATO and Western Europe. This according to the Russian FSB and MI6 sources. Trump has indicated to us that he does not mind if Russia takes over the European Union because, well, there's a lot of Nazis over there. MI6 confirms the denazification of Europe will mean the removal of governments of most Western European governments. Partial confirmation of this can be found in various news items, such as one here that's saying that Donald Trump has ordered the withdrawal of 20,000 troops from Western Europe. That has not been absolutely confirmed to me, but that's according to a post on U.S. Homeland Security News on X, and the community notes say, this is misleading. There's been no official announcement about this. According to the European diplomatic sources, Donald Trump is willing to reduce the U.S. troops in Europe by about 20%, which would be about 20,000 men. So we take that with interest. Russia's TASS news agency, for its part, reports top military officials in Armenia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine took part in a meeting with the NATO Military Committee in Brussels last week, and Russian FSB sources say these former Soviet countries will join NATO as a precursor to Russia also joining. In another sign Russia's in charge, Hungarian President Viktor Orban, speaking on behalf of the European Union, ordered the Ukrainian government to restore all Russian gas transit to Central Europe. This will stop attacks on the Turk Stream pipeline and provide guarantees for continued oil transit. This means Europe is no longer going to deindustrialize itself by buying liquid natural gas from America that is 50% more expensive than the Russian equivalent. Once again, I don't know the facts of that. I'm just giving you this information for your own research. And yet another sign that Trump has reached a deal over Europe with Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Russian TV that if Donald Trump had been the president, if the victory had not been stolen from him in 2020, the Ukrainian crisis that arose in 2022 would never have happened. Later in that interview, Putin went on to say the United States' previous elections were falsified through postal voting. They bought ballots for $10, filled them out, threw them in the mailboxes, and there was no supervision from observers. Well, we know that that did happen. The controllers of Western Europe, Davos World Economic Forum, are all admitting defeat. At one of their panel discussions, Yale University professor Walter Reed said, I think we need to also factor in not only who has won, Donald Trump, but who has lost, which is to say us. Anyway, God willing, one last item. I need your support right here at Freedom 1300. Please call Doc 281-914-1331, 281-914-1331, and let us drive business to you. Your competitors right now are getting your business, and the reason they're getting it is because nobody knows you exist. We want to get your website, your phone number, and your address out there in front of people. We want to put it right there so that it'll be available for the folks that watch it on Rumble. And, of course, your phone number for the people that listen right here on Freedom 1300 in Beaumont. You have a choice, and you chose Freedom 1300.